Hello everyone, I hope you're having a happy New Year's. Today we're going to be getting back into our review of Life 3.0, Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence by Max Tegmark. So without further ado, we're going to go through chapters 5 through 8, as well as the outro of the book, a little bit of background information on some of the topics mentioned there. So without further ado, we're going to get into chapter 5, which is Aftermath, the next 10,000 years. And essentially what it does is it gives some very, very detailed scenarios about what could happen after super intelligent AI breaks out and takes control. Some of these scenarios include the gatekeeper, the protector god, the conquerors, the benevolent the benevolent dictator. And basically it goes through what world an AI might want to create, based not only on the goals that are given to it by humans, but how the AI quote-unquote feels the best way to achieve those goals is. This chapter is about goals, and it tackles the question of what end goals an artificial intelligence might have, which we may or may not understand. They provide a lot of technical examples, but they're pretty easy to latch onto and interesting once you get into the gist of it. It also Max Tegmark also warns here against anthropomorphizing AI, assuming that it has feelings similar to humans, because quite frankly, artificial intelligence machines aren't structured like that. We don't know what properties a machine needs to have a subjective experience, much less to think and act like a human being with complex emotions. And speaking of that, while Chapter 8 is the shortest chapter in the entire book, outside of the prologue and actually outside the epilogue, Chapter 8 is the short. Speaking of that, consciousness. Chapter 8 delves into this, speaking of that, Chapter 8 is all about consciousness. On the topic of artificial intelligences having human-like emotions, Chapter 8 delves deep into the idea of machines' consciousness. So it first tries to determine what consciousness is, or at least the criteria for what consciousness is. Truth is, nobody knows what it is. We know the experience of being conscious, and we know the experience of being unconscious, but we don't know what causes that experience. And as I said before, we don't know the properties that a machine will need to be conscious. But the book delves into this chapter pretty well. It uses examples from all of the chapters preceding it to help explain its point on AI consciousness. It notes that it's not a guarantee, essentially, but that it is possible, in theory anyway. Although thinkers have pondered the mystery of consciousness for thousands of years, the rise of AI adds a sudden urgency, in particular to the question of predicting which intelligent entities have subjective experiences. As we saw in Chapter 3, the question of whether intelligent machines should be granted some form of rights depends on... Ever since I learned about the nuclear arms race at age 14, I've been concerned that the power of our technology was growing faster than the wisdom with which we manage it. I therefore decided to sneak a chapter about this challenge into my first book, Our Mathematical Universe, even though the rest of it was primarily about physics. I made a New Year's resolution in 2014 that I was no longer allowed to complain about anything without putting some serious thought into what I could personally do about it, and I kept my pledge during my book tour that January. Mia and I did lots of brainstorming about starting some sort of non-profit organization focused on improving the future of life through technological stewardship. She insisted that we give it a positive name as different as possible from Doom and Gloom Institute, and Let's Worry About the Future Institute. Since Future of Humanity Institute was already taken, we converged on the Future of Life Institute, FLI, which had the added advantage of being more inclusive. On January 22nd, the book tour took us to Santa Cruz, and as the California sun set over the Pacific, we enjoyed dinner with our old friend Anthony Aguirre and persuaded him to join forces with us. He's not only one of the wisest and most idealistic people I know, but also someone who's managed to put up with running another non-profit organization, the Foundational Questions Institute, with me for over a decade. Max Tegmark is going on his book tour, promoting, I think is, what is it? So while Max Tegmark is promoting his book, Our Mathematical Universe, through early 2014, we ended up finding out that he also attended a conference in Puerto Rico. He also hosted a conference in Puerto Rico. So how do I segue into this? Because the tale of the FLI team. So over the course of this epilogue, another very interesting thing that I wanted to talk about before we finish the book, maybe another interesting thing I wanted to talk about before we end the book is that in the course of the epilogue, we come across the Puerto Rico conference. It was a big tech conference that took place in the island of Puerto Rico in 2015. I guess that's pretty self-explanatory. Before we end this review, I just want to go over something that was interesting, to me anyway, during the course of the epilogue. Max Tegmark mentions over the course of the epilogue, and this is something I wanted to talk about before we end this review. The Puerto Rico conference, high-tech, one look at that photo kind of pokes a fatal hole in the argument that artificial intelligence will be used to the benefit of all humanity. If these are supposed to... let's see... The epilogue also discusses the AI safety conference that took place in Puerto Rico in 2015, which Max and his wife Mia attended. A lot of Silicon Valley bigwigs were there, a lot of well-esteemed AI researchers, engineers, technologists, things like that. But he also provides a photo, and one look at the photograph is more than enough to poke a huge hole in the argument that artificial intelligence as it is now, or as this conference is talking about, will be used to the benefit of all humanity. The truth is, the vast majority of the conference consisted of Europeans, Northern Europeans anyway, from higher prestigious backgrounds. And this really bothered me at the end, because if the future of humanity, if AI is going to be such a staple, it's so intricately wound. No, sorry. Let's try it again. If anything, the common citizen needs to be engaged and involved in these conversations and have input in the massive decisions that are made. Unfortunately, most of the world's population is exploited nowadays, and with AI, this has the potential to get exponentially worse. So, as regular citizens, it's up to you and me to step up to the plate and ask questions.